Tom was a quiet man who had served his country for many years. Life after the army had not been easy for him. He lived alone in a small, old house at the edge of the city. The paint on the walls was fading, the roof leaked when it rained, and the garden was filled with wild grass. Despite the hardships, Tom was proud of what he had. He had learned to manage on little money, and he was careful with everything he owned. One hot afternoon, Tom was sitting in his worn-out chair near the window, drinking a cup of tea. The city was noisy, with cars honking and children playing in the streets. Tom liked the sound of life outside, even if he was alone most of the time. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door made him tense. He opened the door slowly. Standing there were three young men, wearing leather jackets and looking confident. Their smiles were not friendly. "Tom, we need $10,000, one of them said, his voice loud and demanding. Tom raised his eyebrows. He looked at the men calmly. "Excuse me," he asked. "You heard me," the man replied. $10,000. Now. You do not have a choice." Tom's heart beat faster, but he did not show fear. He had faced difficult situations before, both in the army and in life. He had learned that fear could make a person weak, but calm thinking could turn things around. "Why are you asking me for money?" Tom asked, keeping his voice steady. "I do not owe anyone anything." The men laughed. "It does not matter what you owe. We want the money. $10,000. Or there will be trouble." Tom thought quickly. He knew he did not have that much cash. If he gave them money, it would ruin him. But if he refused, they might destroy his small house or worse. He needed a plan. He smiled faintly. "Why don't you come inside?" he said. "We can talk calmly." The men looked surprised. They were used to people being scared of them, not inviting them into their homes. But their greed made them agree. They stepped inside. Tom poured 3 cups of tea and handed one to each of them. The men sat down on the old sofa, looking around the small living room. Tom noticed the way they inspected everything, probably thinking it had hidden cash. They did not know that Tom was observing them carefully. "Why do you think you can threaten me?" Tom asked politely. "I am just one man. You have power in numbers, yes, but threats do not work on everyone." The men smirked. "You will give us the money, old man, or you will regret it," one of them said. Tom leaned back in his chair, thinking. He remembered the army lessons about strategy and patience. Sometimes, winning a fight did not mean fighting with strength. It meant using your mind. He needed to find a way to turn this situation around without losing anything. "Do you know anything about this neighborhood?" Tom asked. "About the houses around here." The men looked confused. "What do you mean?" Tom pointed to the window. "The buildings across the street, the empty lots. Some people think they are worthless, but they are not. They have value if you know how to use them." The men laughed. "Old buildings. We want money, not old houses." Tom smiled. He had started something without them knowing. Sometimes, people see what they want to see, not what is real. Those buildings could be worth much more than money in your pocket. But you would need to know how to use them. The men did not understand, but their curiosity was sparked. Greed was strong. They began to ask questions about the buildings, the land, and the streets around them. Tom answered carefully, making sure he gave just enough information to keep them interested but not enough to reveal his plan. After a long talk, the men left, thinking about what Tom had said. They still demanded the $10,000, but a small seed of curiosity had been planted. Tom watched them leave with a calm smile. He knew that sometimes, the right words and a little patience could change the entire situation. Tom sat down again in his chair. He sipped his tea slowly and thought about what to do next. He had no money to give them, but he had something better: knowledge, patience, and a plan. If he played his cards right, this threat could turn into an opportunity. The afternoon sun shone through the window, lighting up the small living room. Tom felt a small spark of hope. He had survived battles before, and he would survive this challenge too. This was just the beginning. The morning after the men had left, Tom woke up early. The sunlight entered through his small window and fell on the worn carpet. He made a cup of tea and sat at the small kitchen table. His mind was busy thinking about the men who had demanded $10,000. He knew they were not going to stop easily, and he needed a plan. Tom was a man who believed in thinking before acting. In the army, he had learned that patience and strategy were more powerful than strength alone. He remembered the times he had faced impossible situations during his service and survived because he stayed calm and observed carefully. This situation was similar. These young men thought they were in control, but Tom knew he had an advantage if he used his mind. He began by writing notes on a small piece of paper. He listed the buildings he owned nearby, the empty lots around the street, and the small businesses that were closed for years. Most people would see them as old and worthless, but Tom saw opportunity. He had been saving money for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. After an hour of planning, Tom grabbed his jacket and left his small house. He walked slowly down the street, observing everything carefully. He passed the empty lots he owned and the old buildings that were falling apart. In his mind, he saw the potential. He could turn these abandoned places into something valuable, but he had to act smart. Tom returned home and sat back at the table. He thought about the men who had demanded money. They were greedy, careless, and impatient. That gave him an idea. He decided he would turn their greed against them. If he could make them believe the buildings were worth something, they might pay him willingly, thinking they were getting a good deal. He picked up his phone and called a small real estate office in the city. "Hello," he said politely, "I have some property I am thinking about selling. Could I make an appointment to discuss it?" The woman on the other end was polite. "Of course, Mr. Tom. When would you like to come in?" "Today, if possible," he replied. Tom spent the next few hours preparing documents and plans. He wrote down numbers showing how much money the buildings could earn if rented or sold. He made simple charts and notes that looked impressive. He wanted the young men to see that the property had value, even if they had never noticed it before. Later in the afternoon, the men returned. They knocked loudly on Tom's door. Their faces were impatient, but there was also curiosity. Tom smiled and invited them inside. "I have something you should see," he said calmly. The men followed him to the living room. Tom showed them the plans he had prepared. He explained carefully how the buildings could earn money if bought and rented. He spoke about small shops, offices, and even a community space that could bring more people to the area. The young men listened, their faces changing from amusement to surprise. They had thought the buildings were useless, but Tom made them look valuable. He did not lie. He only showed the potential and made it exciting. "See," Tom said quietly, "these buildings may look old, but they can bring more money than $10,000 in a short time. If you know how to use them, you can earn much more than you imagined." The men exchanged glances. Their greed was now mixed with interest. They asked questions, and Tom answered carefully, never giving too much away. He wanted them curious enough to stay, but not clever enough to take advantage of him. After an hour, the men left, talking among themselves. Tom watched them go with a calm smile. He had done what he wanted. He had planted the idea in their minds that the property was valuable. He knew they would return soon, ready to make a deal. Tom cleaned the small living room and sat back in his chair. He felt a mix of excitement and calm. This was not just about defending himself. This was an opportunity to turn a threat into something positive. He had waited for the right moment, and now it was coming closer. As the sun began to set, Tom looked out the window at the empty lots and old buildings. In his mind, he already saw the future. The neighborhood could be different. People could have work, children could play safely, and the area could be lively again. All of this could start from the careful steps he was taking now. Tom took a deep breath. He knew the men would return, and when they did, they would bring their greed and impatience with them. But he also knew that he had the knowledge, the patience, and the plan to turn the situation in his favor. The quiet veteran was ready. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling a quiet excitement. The previous day's events had given him hope. He knew the young men would return. Their greed had been sparked, and now they wanted to see the truth for themselves. Tom drank his tea slowly and looked out the window at the old buildings across the street. Each one had a story, each one had potential, and now he could see a path forward. He decided to take a short walk to the neighborhood. The sun was warm, and the streets were filled with life. Children ran past, laughing, and shopkeepers cleaned their windows. Tom felt a sense of calm determination. He had faced battles before, but this challenge was different. It was a battle of minds, a test of patience, and he was ready. As he walked, Tom noticed small details that others ignored. The corner lot had a strong foundation, even though weeds had taken over. The old shop building had a roof that, with some repairs, could last for many years. These discoveries made him smile. Others saw only ruins, but Tom saw opportunity. When he returned home, there was a knock on the door. Tom's heart did not race. He knew who it was. The young men had come back, curious and eager. Their confidence was still strong, but there was now a hint of caution in their eyes. They had spent the night thinking about what Tom had shown them, and their thoughts were filled with dollar signs. "Good morning," Tom said politely as he opened the door. "I am glad you came back. I have something new to show you." The men entered quickly, their eyes scanning the room for clues or advantages. Tom guided them to the small table where he had placed maps and papers. He spread them out carefully, showing the layout of the neighborhood, the empty lots, and the old buildings. "These buildings are not just empty spaces," Tom explained. "They have a foundation, a history, and the potential to grow into something valuable. If you invest in them carefully, you could make more than $10,000 very quickly." The men leaned closer, studying the maps. Tom watched them carefully. Their eyes widened as they began to realize that these places could indeed be worth money. They had never thought beyond the surface. They had never seen potential where others ignored it. "I have spoken to a few people about these buildings," Tom continued. "They are willing to invest if someone takes action. But you must move quickly. The opportunity will not last forever." One of the men scratched his head. "Are you saying we can make real money with these old buildings?" Tom nodded calmly. "Yes, if you are willing to work and take the risk. The choice is yours." The young men whispered among themselves. Tom stayed quiet, letting their curiosity and excitement grow. He knew that people often act faster when they think they are about to miss a chance. Their greed was now working in his favor. After a long discussion, the men left again, this time looking thoughtful and even a little impressed. Tom closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. He had done exactly what he planned. He had planted the idea of value in their minds. They believed that the old buildings could make them rich, and soon they would return, ready to make a deal. Tom returned to his chair by the window and reflected on the day. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this was different. This was not about fighting with force. It was about using intelligence, patience, and observation. He had learned long ago that sometimes the quietest people could be the strongest. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Tom noticed a small group of neighbors walking past. They waved at him, smiling. Some of them had lived in the area for years, seeing only decay and loss. Tom felt a sense of responsibility. If he could turn this neighborhood around, he could help many people. He thought about the young men again. They were coming back, drawn by the idea of profit. But Tom had the upper hand. He knew the streets, the buildings, and the community. They did not. He was not just defending himself, he was preparing to change the neighborhood for the better. The evening arrived, and Tom sat with a notebook in his lap. He wrote down a few ideas for renovations, small businesses, and ways to attract people to the area. His mind was full of possibilities. The challenge that had seemed threatening yesterday was now turning into an opportunity. Tom looked out the window one last time before going to bed. The old buildings stood silently in the twilight, waiting for someone to unlock their potential. Tom smiled. He was ready. He would turn this threat into a victory, and in the process, he would change the neighborhood forever. The next day, Tom woke up with a sense of purpose. The morning sun shone brightly over the small neighborhood, giving it a warm, inviting glow. Tom drank his tea slowly, thinking about the plan he had set in motion. The young men who had demanded $10,000 were still curious about the buildings he owned. They believed he had something valuable, and now it was time to bring them closer to the opportunity he had prepared. Tom left his small house and walked to the real estate office he had called earlier. The office was small but organized, with maps and documents neatly arranged on the walls and tables. A friendly woman at the reception greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Tom. Are you ready for the meeting?" she asked politely. "Yes," Tom replied. "I would like to show someone the potential of my properties today." The woman nodded and led him to a quiet meeting room. Tom spread out the documents and maps carefully. He had prepared charts showing how the buildings could generate income, simple calculations of rent, small businesses, and improvements that would increase their value. Everything was clear and easy to understand, even for someone who did not know much about property. Soon, the three young men arrived. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and excitement. They had spent the last day thinking about Tom's words. They believed they were about to find a golden opportunity, and their eagerness showed clearly in the way they moved. Tom greeted them calmly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I thought it would be better to see the numbers and plans in a proper setting. This will help you understand the real potential of the properties." The men leaned over the table, looking closely at the papers. Tom explained everything carefully. He pointed to the old buildings, showing how small repairs could increase their value. He described simple businesses that could open in the empty lots. He even suggested community spaces that could attract people to the neighborhood. The young men listened silently. Their faces changed from amusement to surprise as they realized that these old buildings could indeed earn money. They had thought the places were worthless, but Tom had shown them a different picture. They could see the possibilities, and their curiosity grew stronger. One of the young men asked, "Are you saying we could make real money with these buildings if we invest now?" Tom nodded calmly. "Yes. But it is not just about money. It is about vision and patience. If you act quickly and wisely, the opportunity will be yours. But if you wait, it may be gone." The men whispered among themselves, their voices low and filled with excitement. Tom stayed quiet, letting them imagine the potential. He knew that people often made decisions quickly when they thought they were about to miss a chance. Their greed and curiosity were working in his favor. After a long discussion, the men began to smile. They were ready to invest, thinking they had found a lucky opportunity. Tom stayed calm, keeping control of the conversation. He did not rush them, but he made sure they felt that taking action now was the best choice. Finally, one of the men said, "We are interested. How much do you want for the buildings?" Tom paused for a moment, thinking carefully. "I will sell half of the properties to you for $10,000, he said. "It is a fair price, considering the potential. You can start earning immediately if you manage them well." The young men looked at each other in surprise. $10,000 was the same amount they had demanded from him. They had expected a fight or a higher price, but now they were being offered a deal. Their greed and excitement made them agree quickly. Tom smiled quietly. He had turned the situation completely around. What had begun as a threat was now an opportunity. The young men thought they were making a clever investment, but Tom had planned it all. In a few minutes, they would sign the papers, and he would gain control of the neighborhood in a way they never imagined. The men pulled out their money and signed the documents. Tom handed them the deeds to half of the properties. The papers were official and binding. The young men were confident they had made a great deal, not realizing how carefully Tom had played every step. After the meeting, Tom walked back to his small house, feeling calm and proud. He had used patience, intelligence, and observation to turn a threat into success. The neighborhood, which had once seemed empty and forgotten, now held new possibilities. As the sun set, Tom looked out at the buildings he owned. He already imagined the changes he would make. The streets could be lively again, small businesses could open, and people could have jobs. He had not only defended himself but also created a chance to improve his community. Tom smiled quietly to himself. The young men had returned thinking they were in control, but in reality, the veteran had outsmarted them. And this was only the beginning. The morning after the meeting, Tom woke up early. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of his small house, lighting the room in a soft glow. He made a cup of tea and sat by the window, thinking about the events of the previous day. The young men had signed the papers and handed over $10,000. They believed they had won, that they had forced him to pay and now owned half of the buildings. In reality, Tom had orchestrated everything carefully. The trade had worked in his favor more than they realized. Tom took out a notebook and reviewed his plan again. He had spent years observing the neighborhood and studying the properties. He knew which buildings had strong foundations, which lots could be rented quickly, and which places could attract small businesses. The young men did not have this knowledge. They were excited and greedy, but they lacked experience. Tom smiled quietly. Their eagerness would soon make them underestimate him further. After breakfast, he walked to the neighborhood. The streets were quiet in the morning, with only a few shopkeepers opening their stores and children playing nearby. Tom checked the buildings carefully. Everything was as he had expected. The empty lots and old shops were ready for renovation, but they required vision and planning. He had both. Later, the young men arrived. They wanted to see their investment in person. They walked into the neighborhood with confident smiles, carrying the deeds they had received. They believed they had gained something valuable. Tom met them calmly near the first building. "Good morning," he said politely. "I am glad you came. Let us take a look at your new properties." The men walked with him, pointing at the buildings and whispering excitedly. Tom stayed quiet, letting them feel ownership. He knew that they would start planning in their minds, trying to imagine profits and opportunities. Their excitement worked in his favor. As they reached the largest building, Tom explained a few small details. "This one has a strong foundation. A small repair here and a new paint job there, and it will be ready for small shops or offices. If you manage it wisely, you could start earning soon." The young men nodded eagerly, unaware of the subtle ways Tom was guiding them. He made them believe they were discovering the value on their own, while in reality, he was leading every step. After walking through several properties, Tom suggested a simple idea. "If you want, we can work together. I have experience in managing these buildings and the neighborhood. You provide the money, and I can guide the improvements. The profit can be shared fairly." The young men looked at each other, surprised. They had expected him to fight or demand more money. They did not expect a cooperative offer. Their confidence made them agree quickly. They did not realize that Tom had set up the terms carefully. By guiding them, he could control the progress and decisions without using force. Tom smiled quietly. He had not only defended himself but had also turned the young men into partners who trusted him. They believed they had leverage, but he was the one in control. Every step of the trade had been planned, and now the neighborhood was in his hands. As the day passed, Tom returned to his house and reviewed his notes. He wrote down small projects for each building, plans for repairs, and ideas for new tenants. He also thought about the community. The neighborhood had been quiet and forgotten for years, but with careful planning, it could become lively again. People could find work, children could play safely, and small shops could open. By evening, the young men had left, discussing potential profits excitedly. They still did not understand the full scope of Tom's strategy. They had handed over $10,000 and believed they were in control. In reality, they had become part of a carefully designed plan that would benefit Tom far more than they imagined. Tom looked out of his window as the sun set, painting the sky in orange and pink. He felt a sense of calm pride. The trade had worked perfectly. What had started as a threat had turned into an opportunity to improve not only his life but the neighborhood as well. The quiet veteran had used patience, intelligence, and observation to transform a dangerous situation into a powerful advantage. He knew there was more work ahead, but for now, he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. The young men thought they had gained something, but Tom had gained much more. As the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Tom felt confident. The neighborhood was no longer just a collection of empty buildings and abandoned lots. It was a place full of potential, and he was the one who would guide it to a brighter future. The trade had been completed, but the real journey was just beginning. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling calm and focused. The sun shone through the small window of his house, illuminating the worn carpet and simple furniture. He brewed a fresh cup of tea and sat by the window, thinking about the neighborhood. The young men had signed the papers and given him $10,000. They believed they had gained something important. They did not yet understand that Tom had carefully guided the trade so that he would gain far more than they expected. Later that day, the young men returned. They were eager to see how their investment was progressing. They walked into the neighborhood with confident steps, believing they were in control. Tom met them at the corner of the street, smiling politely. "Good morning," he said calmly. "I am glad to see you back. Let us look at the properties again and discuss the next steps." The young men followed Tom, pointing at the buildings and whispering to each other. Their excitement was obvious. They still did not realize how carefully Tom had set everything up. Every suggestion he had made, every detail he had shown, had guided them to believe that they were making smart decisions. In reality, Tom had been in control the entire time. As they reached the largest building, Tom began explaining some small improvements that could be made. "This one can be ready for small shops in a few weeks," he said. "The foundation is strong, and with a little work, it could bring in good income." The men nodded eagerly. They were impressed by the potential they had discovered. Tom stayed calm, letting them imagine the profits and planning their own actions. He knew that their greed and excitement would soon make them act quickly without thinking carefully. After walking through a few more buildings, Tom suggested a plan. "If you would like, we can work together. I can manage the repairs and improvements, and you provide the funds. We can share the profits fairly." The young men looked at each other in surprise. They had expected him to ask for more money or resist them. Instead, he offered guidance and cooperation. Their excitement made them agree immediately. They did not realize that Tom's offer was designed to give him control of the decisions and direction of the neighborhood. For the next few hours, Tom walked with them from building to building, pointing out small repairs and improvements. He spoke about tenants and small businesses that could open in each space. The men listened carefully, still imagining that they had discovered everything on their own. Tom smiled quietly to himself. Every word he spoke, every suggestion he made, strengthened his control over the properties. By late afternoon, the young men were tired but excited. They had already started imagining the profits they could earn. Tom walked back to his small house, feeling calm and satisfied. The trade had been completed perfectly. What had begun as a threat had been transformed into a powerful opportunity. As the sun began to set, the young men gathered near the first building. They were talking loudly, still focused on the potential earnings. Tom stood at a distance, observing quietly. Then he decided it was time for them to understand the true extent of his plan. He walked toward them calmly. "Do you realize," he asked politely, "that while you own half of these buildings, I still control the neighborhood?" The men looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. "I mean that the decisions, improvements, and management of these buildings depend on experience and planning," Tom explained. "I have both. You may own part of the property, but the real control is in the hands of the person who understands it. That person is me." The young men froze. They looked at each other, realizing that they had been outsmarted. They had handed over $10,000 and thought they were gaining power. In reality, Tom had guided them step by step, making them believe they were in control while he quietly managed everything. Tom continued calmly. "I have used the resources wisely, and I have planned for the neighborhood's future. You may have money invested, but the success of these properties depends on my knowledge and actions. I have turned a threat into an opportunity, and I am the one who will benefit the most." The young men were shocked. They had never expected that the quiet veteran they tried to intimidate would outsmart them completely. Their confidence and greed had blinded them, and now they understood that Tom had been in control the entire time. Tom watched as they slowly left, talking quietly among themselves. They had realized the truth, but there was nothing they could do. The veteran had won without conflict, using only patience, intelligence, and observation. Tom returned to his small house and looked out at the neighborhood. The buildings stood silently in the fading light, full of potential and promise. He had gained control of the area, outsmarted those who tried to threaten him, and created the first steps toward a better future. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Tom felt a quiet sense of pride. He had turned a dangerous situation into a powerful advantage. The young men had demanded money and thought they were in control, but in reality, the veteran had become the most respected and powerful person in the neighborhood. The real victory was his, and it had only just begun. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling a sense of purpose stronger than ever. The neighborhood that had once been quiet and forgotten now held promise. The young men had realized the truth. They had believed they were in control, but Tom had guided everything carefully. Now it was time to turn potential into reality. He brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the buildings. Each one had a story, and each one had potential. Tom had a plan to restore them, to create opportunities for people, and to improve the entire area. He made a small list of priorities: repairs, tenants, community spaces, and safety. Everything would be done step by step. Tom left his house and began walking through the neighborhood. The sun was rising, casting a warm light over the streets. He noticed the cracks in the walls, the weeds growing through the sidewalks, and the doors that were broken or missing. These details reminded him that real change would take effort, but he was ready. He knew that every improvement would not only increase the value of the properties but also help the people who lived nearby. By mid-morning, Tom had visited each building, noting the repairs needed and imagining the tenants who could fill them. He walked to the corner lot, which had been empty for years. He pictured a small shop opening there, bringing goods and work to the neighborhood. He imagined a place for children to play safely and families to gather. Everything he saw was full of possibilities. The young men arrived again, carrying papers and looking anxious. They had begun to realize that the situation was different from what they had imagined. They had the money invested, but they had no idea how to make the properties succeed. Tom met them calmly and led them to the first building. "Here is where we start," he said. "Repairs, small businesses, and community projects. With careful management, these buildings can bring income and improve the neighborhood." The young men looked at each other nervously. They had hoped for quick profits, but Tom was showing them that success required planning and effort. They nodded, realizing they needed his guidance. Tom smiled quietly. He had turned them into partners who relied on his knowledge and decisions. Over the next few weeks, Tom worked tirelessly. He repaired walls, painted buildings, and cleared empty lots. He reached out to small business owners, offering them affordable spaces. He created a safe playground for children and a community corner where neighbors could meet and talk. Slowly, the neighborhood began to change. People started noticing the improvements. Shopkeepers reopened their stores, children played in the streets safely, and families returned to the area. Tom's careful planning and management were paying off. The young men watched, still excited about the potential profits, but now they understood that Tom's experience and intelligence were the real keys to success. One afternoon, Tom stood on the corner of the street, looking at the busy neighborhood. He saw a small bakery opening, a tailor arranging clothes, and children running with laughter. He felt proud. He had turned a threat into an opportunity, and he had done more than protect himself. He had created hope for the community. The young men approached him, looking both impressed and a little surprised. "You really knew what you were doing," one of them admitted. "We thought we were in control, but you guided everything." Tom nodded politely. "Experience, patience, and observation can change outcomes. You believed you had power, but real success comes from understanding, planning, and effort. That is what makes the difference." The young men smiled, now respecting the quiet veteran who had outsmarted them. They had learned a valuable lesson about intelligence, patience, and foresight. As the sun set, Tom returned to his small house. The streets were lively, the buildings repaired, and the neighborhood full of energy. He had transformed the area, helped the people, and shown that courage and intelligence could overcome threats. Tom sat by his window, sipping tea, and looked at the stars appearing in the sky. He felt a deep sense of pride and satisfaction. He had turned a dangerous situation into a triumph. The young men had demanded money, but in the end, he had gained far more than they had imagined. The neighborhood was no longer quiet and forgotten. It was alive, thriving, and full of possibilities. Tom had not only defended himself but had created a brighter future for everyone around him. His victory was not just about property or money, it was about turning challenges into opportunities and using intelligence to make a lasting difference. As night fell, the quiet veteran smiled. He knew that this was only the beginning. The neighborhood had a future, and he would guide it carefully, step by step. What had started as a threat had become a story of triumph, respect, and hope. Tom had not only survived, he had won, and the neighborhood would never be the same again.